Hello, everyone. This is Piero San Giorgio. I am very happy tonight to host Constantin von Hoffmeister, who is going to talk to us about one of his, or not the latest book, in fact, but because I just discovered there's a new one of his book, Esoteric Trumpism. Hello, Constantin.
Hello, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure. I just finished reading your book, Esoteric Trumpism. By the way, the link will be under the description of the video. You must buy it and you must read it. It's excellent. It is a book that has a fascinating approach on Trump, on what he means, and what it stands in today's world. We are at 2025. It's pivot time for Europe, for America, and I thought your book is very thought-provoking. Can you tell us how you were led to write this very interesting book?
Well, certainly. So, Esoteric Trumpism was published in January 2024, actually on the 20th of January 2024. So, exactly 1 year before Trump's second inauguration. I started writing the book in the middle of 2023 in the summer, and I was always interested in the phenomenon of Trumpism, meaning the movement that Trump engendered. So I was never really that interested in Trump as a person or in his biography. I was always more interested in Trump as a symbol, what he represents, so to speak. Well, why did I write the book? I wrote the book because I've been fascinated with Oswald Spengler, the German philosopher, for many years. And Oswald Spengler is mostly famous for his magnum opus, The Decline of the West, which he wrote about 100 years ago in the Weimar Republic. And The Decline of the West prophesies the downfall of Western civilization. I mean, in the book, Spengler describes history as cyclical. He basically argues that all civilizations are like organisms. So they are born, they mature, they grow old, they grow senile, and then they die. So first, after they are born, they are cultures. And when they grow senile, they turn into civilizations. So the whole term civilization has a negative connotation, according to Oswald Spengler. It's basically an ossified culture, a culture that is overwhelmed with technology where people are basically mere cogs in a machine. And the whole heroic ethos is lost, basically. And Oswald Spengler talks about the Faustian principle and the Faustian spirit of Western man. So the term Faustian derives from Dr. Faustus, the medieval doctor who made a pact with the devil to achieve great powers, but in return had to sell his soul, basically. And well, there's a famous play by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe called Faust. There's also another one, Dr. Faustus, by Christopher Marlowe. And the term Faustian describes Western civilization because our civilization, the West, is basically the only civilization that always wants to expand, go further. Space exploration is one example. Christopher Columbus discovering the New World is one example. I think the whole phenomenon of colonialism and the British Empire, all of these are facets of the Faustian spirit. And I think there are negative and positive aspects to the Faustian spirit. Well, the positive aspect is it's very heroic and it gives us a destiny, basically. So we're not stagnant. We can achieve great things by going further, basically, and exploring and discovering things not only for ourselves, but for all mankind. But at the same time, it basically forces us to expand where we shouldn't expand into. And well, the result of colonialism and the breakup of colonialism is that now we have to deal with mass immigration in the West, of course. I mean, that would be one example. So Oswald Spengler talks about the Faustian spirit, the decline of the West. He also wrote another book called Early Days of World History, which was only published posthumously after his death because he wasn't able to finish it before he died of a heart attack. So the book is pretty massive. It's like 600 pages. It's mostly fragmentary. Some chapters are complete, but most of them are incomplete. It's still readable, though. I mean, it reads very well. It makes perfect sense. And I think it was only published in Germany in the 1950s. And it had never been translated into English ever until I translated it several years ago. And it was published by Legend Books 4 or 5 years ago. You can also order it on Amazon. And in this book, he describes ancient civilization. It's sort of like, I would almost call it a prequel to the decline of the West. Well, going back to the decline of the West, in the decline of the West, he says that during the terminal stage of a civilization, like in the dying West, for example, there usually appear strong men who he calls the Caesars. And the Caesars are the ones that try to stem the tide of decline for one last time, basically. According to Spengler, it's eventually futile. I mean, even these Caesars will not be able to stop the death of a culture or civilization. They will only prolong the life of this civilization for a certain period of time. I mean, Spengler was very pessimistic. I mean, because it's like organisms. You are born, you die, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And according to Spengler, the same is true of cultures and civilizations. So he said this like 100 years ago, that soon the West will enter the age of the Caesars, right? So when all these strong men will appear in a dying civilization, basically. And I found the parallel very interesting because obviously our civilization is already on its deathbed and has been for decades, right? Possibly centuries. And I always thought that Trump could be interpreted as a Caesar-like figure, as envisioned by Spengler in his book, The Decline of the West. Because basically Trump is trying to turn back the clock, so to speak, from what Alexander Dugin, the Russian philosopher, calls liberalism 2.0 back to liberalism 1.0. So liberalism 1.0 is basically the non-woke kind of liberalism. When you know, maybe I would say the United States up until the 1980s was still a liberal country in terms of economics, individual freedom, etc. But it wasn't infected with a woke mind virus. It didn't have this crazy LGBTQ transgender nonsense and DEI and critical race theory. It didn't exist. So it was a healthy kind of liberalism. Now we have liberalism 2.0. Basically, we have everything is also capitalist liberal, but at the same time, it is also woke and extremely leftist. And it's a sort of diseased liberalism. Yes. So Trump basically wants to go back to liberalism 1.0. He wants to turn back the clock like the Caesars in Spengler's work, back to when America was still fairly healthy. And in my opinion, I think the United States was very healthy until 1980s, maybe the early 90s, and everything else was downhill from there. And I also speak from personal experience because I lived in the US also for over 12 years. Also went to high school there in the 90s and all that stuff. So, so the point is that Esoteric Trumpism, my book, it depicts Trump as such a Caesar-like figure, but from a philosophical perspective.
Yeah, in fact, I can see that you're a scholar of philosophy because you can, in reading your book, clearly you make reference to Hegel, and that there is this idea that there are moments in history that you can't change; they're just going to happen, and your inflection is very minimal, and you actually have to be careful not to be crushed. One of the things that I found fascinating in your book, because I'm myself very fond of this author, is your reference to Lovecraft. And this is not very common to see references to the mythos that Lovecraft, this an amazing writer of the 1920s and 30s in the US, has developed. Can you tell our audience, how do you see the ideas of Lovecraft fitting the esoteric Trumpism approach?
Well, I've been a huge fan of Lovecraft for decades, ever since the freshman year in college when I first discovered him. I even went to Providence, Rhode Island, where he lived most of his life, and put flowers on his grave once. And I thought Lovecraft's mythos, when he talks about the great old ones, like these these cosmic creatures, basically, that come from the nether regions of our universe to our Earth, basically, and are worshipped as gods by certain cults on Earth. But these creatures, and he calls them the Great Old Ones, like Cthulhu is the most famous of them, of course. These Great Old Ones are not benevolent gods or anything, but they're not necessarily malevolent either. I think they're completely indifferent to the fate of humanity, basically. And this is existential dread that Lovecraft described, basically, that we as mankind, we live on this blue planet in just the vast, indifferent reaches of a black universe, basically, that does not care what happens to us at all. And it's all meaningless. And on top of all this, there are these creatures that haunt us and that basically created civilizations on Earth eons and eons ago, thousands and thousands of years ago. I mean, he has this whole novel where he talks about subterranean city in Antarctica and all that stuff. Yes, I thought it fit perfectly with the whole legend of Trump, because Trump always talks about the swamp, right? Like the swamp is the enemy, basically. And for me, the swamp sounds so mythical in itself, right? What a swamp! It sounds very ominous. And I thought it had a very Lovecraftian undertone. And this is why I tried to work in the Lovecraftian mythos into my book, because I wanted to portray Trumpism as a movement against the organic decay, basically, that is going on in America and the West as a whole, basically, as the only ones that realize what is really beneath the surface and trying to fight these forces, basically. Yeah. So Trump as a Lovecraftian hero.
Yeah, and for sure, when you think about the deep state pulling so many ropes and so many strings in the background, and this deep state is very hard to pinpoint precisely. It's very proteiform. It's very moving. It changes alliances. It can break down into sub factions and reassemble at will. It does look like a sort of Nyarlathotep or a Yog-Sothoth type of old creature that can that maybe is with us for millennia already, and it's just moving from one country to another. And however, in your book, I must warn the readers that it's not an esoteric book. It is a very down to earth. I think you have analysis which is very pertinent to today's world, and it's a book worth to read. And I encourage everyone to get it on the link below. However, and I must warn, I did not read your most recent book, but can you tell us also about your most recent book and how they link together?
Well, my last book, the last book I published, called Multipolarity, exclamation mark, yes, in all capital letters. Well, and that's what the topic of the book is. It's about multipolarity. It's a trendy word at the moment. I mean, everybody talks about it, including Marco Rubio, yes, the Secretary of State. He even admitted that basically we live in a multipolar world. And this book basically wants to show the reader what multipolarity actually means, also in a philosophical sense, as well as a political, historical, and cultural one. So basically, I would say that starting from 1945, after World War II, we had the United States and the Soviet Union as the two great victors, basically, and they pretty much divided the world into two camps, right? Like the US camp and the Soviet camp. I mean, you had the non-aligned movement as well, but it was not very powerful. Yes, so basically you had two superpowers in the world, the USSR and the USA, and with different ideologies opposed to each other. And I mean, they fought many proxy wars. Like I would say Vietnam was one proxy war. For example, Afghanistan was another one when the Soviets were in Afghanistan, I mean, and the US supported the Mujahideen. So I would say from 1945 till the early 90s. So for over 45 years, we had a bipolar world. Yes, because we had two poles. We had the United States and the Soviet Union. Then in the early 90s, the Soviet Union broke up and ceased to exist. And the West basically swooped in to the void in what once was the Soviet Union and tried to exploit the situation and enforce its liberal capitalist values on Russia and all the other former Soviet states. And Russia was very, very weak and impoverished as a result of the breakup of the Soviet Union. So for several years, I would say that the deep state, again, the Western deep state, tried to manipulate Russia. And that's when we entered the unipolar moment, right? Because the Soviet Union ceased to exist. It broke up into separate countries. The largest one of them is what is now called the Russian Federation, but it was severely weakened. It was not a superpower. So you only had the United States as a hyperpower, because if there's only one pole, then it's not just a superpower, I would say it's a hyperpower, right? So you had a unipolar world. But I think now, with a resurgent Russian Federation under the leadership of Putin, who, in my opinion, has been doing a great job of building up the strength of Russia after the Yeltsin debacle, I would say now we live in a multipolar world because America as a pole is weakening in front of our eyes, yes, on a daily basis. Basically, its influence in the Middle East, I would say it's extremely evident in Ukraine, in the Ukraine conflict, which in my opinion is a proxy war between the United States and the Russian Federation. And I would say that the US basically lost this proxy war, right? And now they're trying to extricate themselves out of this conflict, and the Russian Federation won. I mean, which just proves to me that the US is not the all-powerful actor anymore that it used to be. So it cannot act on the world stage with impunity anymore, like it used to, because there are other serious actors now who stand in the way. So I would say that it's the Russian Federation is one of them. Then, of course, China, and to some extent, India, even though India is not as strong yet. So these are what are called state civilizations. Yes, they're not just nation states. They're called state civilizations, and basically a state civilization is just a technical term for empire. Yes.
Yeah.
So we have so basically what I describe in my book is that we're basically returning to the age of empires. Yes. And Trump is also mentioned in the book because I think Trump is helping along the process of emerging multipolarity, whether he wants to or not. Yes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So here's the question: when before 1945, it was multipolar world. There were many nations, many empires, French Empire, the British Empire. In a way, the American had also some colonial empires across the Pacific. There was the Japan Empire, and therefore there were frictions, and therefore there were wars. As we come back now, one of the great things about the post 1945 world was that nuclear weapons kind of made a massive war impossible because no one wanted to take the risk to make it happen, or at least that's the narration we have, and obviously that's what we saw. Now, as we come back to empires or nations, certainly great nations that are going to bump into each other, we see now America that tries to, at least the new administration sees more challenges with China than in old Europe that they want to let behind. How is this going to happen with the nuclear weapons that exist? Let's say, how could an empire that has nuclear weapons deal with an empire that doesn't, and the opposite as well? How do you see this playing out?
Well, you cannot be an empire without nuclear weapons because you cannot be a state civilization without being sovereign. And you cannot have sovereignty without nuclear weapons. It's not possible for obvious reasons. Yes. And this is
Yeah.
why sorry?
Sorry to interrupt. And yet you
Okay.
can have nuclear weapon and not be sovereign, like it is the case for UK, for example.
Well, that's true, but the UK is a special case, right? It's
Mm.
basically the America's lapdog to some extent, and it has been for a while. I think the only semi-sovereign country in Europe is France at the moment. And it's also because they have nuclear weapons and a lot of overseas possessions still.
So how about Israel, for example,
Well, I
which
would
is
say
a very
Israel
tiny
is,
country but has nuclear weapons?
well, that's true, right? Well, it's definitely a sovereign country, in my
Yeah,
opinion, but it's not a state civilization. It's not an empire, right? I think
that's true.
it might want to be an empire, yes. And the question is, though, does it belong to the American pole, or is it a separate pole? Yes. I mean,
Or
I
is it the
think,
other way around?
well, I think Israel, United States, some could argue that they belong to the same pole.
Hmm.
Yes. And the same is true, or was true with the EU. I think, especially say under the Biden administration, I would say the EU and the United States would have been considered one pole, like the Western pole. Now we see a sort of break happening, like some sort of divorce between the United States and Western Europe. The question is, how long will this divorce last, and will it be permanent, right? Because the problem with the United States is that there's no real continuity because of the system that they have. So you might have, like, I know, some leftist liberal president, globalist, a leader like Biden, basically like a puppet of the globalist elite for 4 years. Then you get somebody like Trump who says, yeah, no, make America strong and healthy again. Yes, America first. I want to recreate the American empire. I want to annex Canada, maybe Greenland. Yes. So, I mean, he's already in the age of empires right
Yes.
now, which I welcome. I think it's a great development. Yes, in my opinion. The problem is still, like, what if he loses? I mean, what would the Republicans lose? What if we get another Democrat president after Trump? They will just reverse everything. That's the problem, right? So basically, the whole MAGA movement needs to become dynastic. Uh, I mean, for America to truly change and become a different civilization. Yes. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
quite optimistic myself.
Let's well, I we have to be optimistic for our American friends and population because the alternative is dislocation, civil war, and massive death because the country is extremely dependent on a functioning just-in-time economy. Now, what you said is very interesting. Is we could have 12 years of a Republican Party with Trump and then Vance, and then someone else comes and reverses completely the plan. Whereas, for example, other systems like China, they have plans over 50 years, 100 years, and they stick to them.
Well, it's the
And
same in Russia, though, right? Like in Russia, in the Russian Federation, I mean, it's officially a democracy, and they call it a sovereign democracy. I mean, it's a democracy with continuity. I mean,
yeah,
even if Putin was replaced with somebody else, it would not change course, at least
no,
not drastically.
not at
Yeah.
this moment.
Uh, but that's the problem, right? With the United States, it's almost like a bipolar system, and by bipolar I mean clinically, like a mental illness, basically, right? It's almost like a schizophrenic system, right? And you also can't trust the US as another country because, not long term at least, because Trump might say to Russia, okay, we'll make a deal with you, we'll do this project together, etc. But then the next administration, which might be Democrats, will just rip it up and say, no, you're the enemy, we'll not deal with you, we'll just stop right there, right? I consider this a serious problem. Don't know how to solve it. We'll just have to be optimistic and hope it will continue and stay on the current course. I mean, Vance as a successor would be ideal, of course. Uh, so going back to nuclear weapons, though, right? I mean, there's a reason why North Korea was never invaded and Iraq was. I mean, the answer is nuclear weapons, of course. Yes. Is North Korea truly sovereign? I think no. I think it belongs to the Chinese pole to some extent. Yes. It's too weak otherwise economically. So
Mm.
I think people argue that the only true state civilizations in existence now are the United States, the Russian Federation, and China, right? And even India is not strong enough yet to be in the same league, but I think it will be very soon.
So with that logic, we should see whatever strong enough economically country, such as Japan, maybe Germany, if it can get its act together back, should and will, or even Turkey and Saudi Arabia for sure, get nuclear weapons very fast.
Yeah, I don't have any hope for Germany or any Western European country, to be honest. I think the ship has sailed for Western Europe. I think it's too late. I mean, it's just my opinion. I think the point of no return has been reached a while ago. I mean, theoretically, I think it's possible when people talk about remigration and maybe some patriotic forces coming into power. But then again, I'm not so sure, right? Because you have patriotic forces like Meloni in Italy, for example. I mean, she's in power. I don't see any change there, like big change in terms of immigration. Yes. So when people talk about the AfD coming to power in Germany, I mean, it's theoretically possible because they're becoming like stronger and stronger. But I think even if it comes into power, you might see what is called the Melonization effect, right? Where they're in power, but they're still not able to do anything to affect any meaningful change. Yes, I mean the Freedom Party in Austria, the FPÖ, I mean they were in power in Austria and they didn't really do anything either, right? So that's the thing. So I think there are so many forces at play, especially when you talk about immigration, that there are simply no easy solutions. Yes. So basically, I mean, I discussed this with some other people the other day, right? What is the solution? In the US, it's the same, right? Like Trump talked about mass deportations, 20 million people before he got elected. I mean, people were holding up the signs, yes. But if you look at the numbers now, the ICE numbers right now, it's like, I know, 500 people per day. So, I mean, if it continues like this at that rate, he will maybe deport 1 million in 4 years. Yes. But then every year, 2 million come in, 2 million new ones. And probably half of the people that are deported will walk right back. So,
yeah. For sure. So interesting topics that we should speak again and talk again in labs. Constantin, I will put the links of both of your books under the description of the video. Perhaps to finish, you mentioned that civilizations eventually die, and that according to Spenglerian ideas, civilization is already close to the moment of death. However, people can survive, and cultures or new cultures can emerge out of the death, like new stars emerge from dying clouds of dying stars. How do you foresee? We are Europeans. Europeans are now everywhere in the world, and unfortunately, we're not the only ones everywhere in the world. But we are in Australia, in North America, in Europe, and how do we regroup? How do we create new cultures? How do we survive? And eventually, in the future, how do we prevail again?
well, I think the only way would be through a convergence of catastrophes, like French philosopher Guillaume Faye said, basically. Maybe there could be like a real pandemic, some kind of natural disaster that wipes out maybe a large percentage of the population, creates massive chaos everywhere. So people can focus on what is really important, on actual values, which is the survival and the maintenance of their own ethnic group, basically. And I think this is possible because, as we all know, civilizations decay when all they want is bread and games. Yes. I mean, people will not revolt, people will not stand up against the status quo if if they have McDonald's and Netflix, basically. Yes. But you take away Netflix and McDonald's, and people will feel very uncomfortable very quickly. And they will eventually focus on what is important and see the culprits of the miserable state of affairs, basically, the people who caused it. So, I mean, there's certainly a cause for optimism. Yes, because history is completely unpredictable. And Guillaume Fay also said it. He said that there's no reason to be pessimistic or resign yourself to some fate, right? Because he didn't really believe in some divine fate. He believed that everything is basically up to us because it is always people that create history, and they're always completely unpredictable, like black swan events that can change the trajectory completely.
Well, let's hope that we'll live through very interesting times.
Yes, I think so. I think we are already living in interesting
We
times
are.
right now,
We definitely are.
and they're
Constantin,
getting more interesting by the day.
Constantin, thank you very much. We'll speak again.
Well, thank you.